The banker called 2 weeks after my husband's funeral and asked why I had been removed from the account that paid our mortgage for 23 years. He said it in the same tone people use to confirm a mailing address. I thought I had heard him wrong. By noon, the banker knew more than my family did. Good day, dear listeners. It's Jenny again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. Now let me tell you how it all began. My name is Lorraine Mercer. I was 68 years old when this happened, and I lived in a brick ranch house outside Columbus, Ohio. It was not a fancy house. It had brown shutters that needed paint, a narrow front porch with one white metal chair, and a kitchen window over the sink that looked out at a crooked maple tree. I had lived there for 27 years. I thought my life in that house was settled. Not perfect, not grand, just settled. I thought that counted for something. My husband, Daniel, had died after a short illness that moved faster than anyone had expected. He was 71. We had been married 24 years. It was a second marriage for both of us. We were not one of those couples people wrote poems about. We paid bills. We argued over hardware store receipts. We watched the news too loud. We knew where every casserole dish belonged. That was our life, plain, regular, built over time. The house had been refinanced once, years ago, when rates dropped, and Daniel thought it made sense. I still remember that meeting because I brought the folder with the pay stubs, the old statements, the homeowner's policy, and the tax returns. Daniel always liked to act like he handled the big things, but I was the one who knew where the papers were. I was the one who balanced the checking account. I was the one who made sure the mortgage draft hit on the right day, month after month, year after year. We had one main checking account tied to the mortgage auto-pay. My wages went into it for years. Later, my part-time bookkeeping income did. Later still, my survivor benefits from my first marriage and then my Social Security. Daniel's pension went there too. It was not some secret pile of money. It was our life account. Groceries, roof repair, gas bill, church donation, and mortgage. That is what it was. Daniel had one son from his first marriage, Eric. I had one son from mine, Michael, who lived 3 states away and worked in freight dispatch. Eric lived 20 minutes from us with his wife, Tara. In the early years, we saw them on birthdays and Christmas and some Sundays. Later, after Daniel's health began to wobble, we saw more of them. At the time, I told myself that meant family was drawing close. I wanted to believe that. A lot of women my age want to believe that. We are taught to mistake increased interest for love, even when it arrives with questions. The questions started small. Where did we keep the deed? Had Daniel ever thought about transfer on death paperwork? Who was listed on the utilities? Was the house still set up right if one of us died? Eric asked these things in a tone he probably thought sounded practical. Tara used softer words. She liked to say things like, "We just want to make sure everything is simple for Lorraine," as if I were in the room but already slightly absent. At first I tried not to mind it. Daniel had been sick. There were appointments, a medication list on the refrigerator, copay receipts in my purse. People start speaking around a widow before she is a widow. I see that now. Looking back, that was the first warning. Daniel had a desk in the den. It was an old oak thing with 2 drawers that stuck in summer and a center drawer full of pens that did not work. He kept warranties in one drawer, useless receipts in another, and papers he called important in a shallow metal tray on top. The truly important papers were never there. They were in the hall closet file cabinet where I kept the labeled folders: mortgage, insurance, taxes, car, medical, savings. I had spent my life making excuses for people I loved. I told myself Eric and Tara were simply worried because Daniel was ill. I did what many women of my generation were taught to do. I kept the peace. But something had shifted. During Daniel's last month, Eric began offering to help with the paperwork. That was the phrase. Not meals, not yard work, not pharmacy pickup. Paperwork. He said it more than once. Tara asked if I wanted her to digitize the files. She said paper records were hard to manage in a crisis. I said no. I liked my files where they were. She smiled too quickly and said, "Of course." I still remember the exact wording because it sounded polite but not pleased. Then mail began turning up, already opened. At first it was only 2 envelopes on the kitchen counter after a hospital day. One was from the insurance company. The other was from the bank. Eric said he had grabbed the mail when he stopped by to check on the furnace filter and opened them without thinking. He said he thought one might be urgent. Daniel nodded as if that explanation made sense. I said nothing because Daniel was tired and I was tired, and some days grief begins before death does. It begins in the home, in the rearrangement of who touches what. A week later, Tara asked whether Daniel had a durable power of attorney. Just in case bills needed handling, I said the bills were being handled. She laughed and said, I know. I just mean if you needed backup." Backup. That was another word I heard too often. I wanted to believe I was imagining it, but that should have told me everything. In the last 10 days of Daniel's illness, the house did not feel like mine. People came and went with casseroles and soft voices, shoes by the door that were not mine, half-finished cups on end tables, whispering in the hallway, Eric standing near Daniel's recliner, talking about what made sense next. I asked what he meant, and he said, "Just making things easier for you, Lorraine." Easier has a cold sound when it comes too early. Daniel died on a Wednesday morning. The funeral was on Saturday. I was still wearing the black dress from the visitation when Tara began helping people clear serving trays from my dining room table, as if she were already running the household. She meant well in appearance. That is the sort of thing that confuses everyone. A person can carry a vegetable tray and still be counting your cabinets. People trust motion. They think busy hands mean honest intentions. After the burial, when the house was finally quiet, I stood in the kitchen looking at the foil pans and flower cards and funeral programs, and I felt something I could not yet name. It was not only grief, it was pressure. That house had become very full of other people's plans. The first hard moment came on Monday, 2 days after the funeral. Eric sat at my kitchen table with his phone face down beside his coffee cup and said we should take a practical look at the house. He spoke in that low, calm voice men use when they want to sound reasonable while saying something ugly. He said the mortgage still existed. He said upkeep was a lot for one person. He said it might be smart to think about ownership cleanup early before things got complicated. I asked him what he meant by ownership cleanup. He said, making sure the house is where it belongs. I said, "It belongs right here." He smiled a little, not kindly. "You know what I mean." No, I did know what he meant. I simply wanted him to say it plainly. Tara jumped in before he had to. She said, "Nobody's trying to upset you. We just think Daniel would have wanted a smoother transition." That was the first time anyone used Daniel's wishes against me before we had even put away the sympathy cards. I said Daniel and I had managed the house together for years, and I would continue managing it. Eric leaned back and said, "As long as you still have access to everything." He said it like a casual remark. I remember that because it was too odd to be casual. Access to everything. At the time, I thought he meant passwords. Looking back, I hear the rest of the sentence that he did not say. That night, I checked the hall closet file cabinet. The folders were there. Nothing obvious was missing, but the mortgage folder was no longer in the front of the drawer where I kept current obligations. It had been moved behind an older tax folder. That sounds small, I know it does, but in a house where papers live in one place for years, small things are loud. I stopped arguing and started checking. The next morning, I pulled the latest mortgage statements. Every payment had come from the same checking account, same bank, same last 4 digits, same auto draft. 23 years of consistency if you counted the original loan and the refinance together. I laid the statements in a line across my kitchen table. My fingerprints were on the corners from years of opening and filing. I felt foolish for being soothed by paper, but paper has a way of calming a person. It does not flatter, it does not pretend. It just sits there and says what happened. That was proof checkpoint number 1, though I did not call it that yet. Mortgage statements showing our account funded that house for years, without interruption, through job changes, surgery, a furnace replacement, Daniel's first hospitalization, and 2 lean winters when I took extra bookkeeping clients to keep the cushion intact. The banker called 3 days after that. His name was Russell Keene. He worked at the branch we had used for years, though I mostly dealt with tellers, and once in a while with a woman named Marcia, who later became very important to me. Russell said he was sorry for my loss, and then, in the same call, asked why I had been removed from the account that was tied to the mortgage auto pay. He said the system had flagged a risk because the account ownership had changed, and the payment authorization history no longer matched the prior records. For a moment, I could not answer him. I said, "Removed?" He said, "Yes, ma'am. The account is now listed under different signing authority than the one used for the mortgage draft pattern." I asked him to repeat that. He did. I told him I had been on that account for over 2 decades. There was a pause. Then he said, "Careful now. That is why I'm calling." I still remember standing at the kitchen sink with the cordless phone in one hand and the dish towel in the other, not moving. The maple tree outside the window looked exactly the same as it had looked every other morning. But inside my house, the floor had shifted. I asked when this had happened. He said the account record showed a removal request had been processed the week before Daniel died. I said that was impossible. He said, "Mrs. Mercer, I think you should come in." That should have told me everything. Instead, it told me enough. I drove to the branch that same afternoon. I wore the same navy cardigan I had worn to pick up the death certificates because I had not yet fully returned to dressing like a person who expected to be seen. The branch smelled like printer toner and floor polish. Marcia, now the senior branch manager, met me near her office. She had known us for years, not socially, not in any deep way, but enough to recognize my signature and Daniel's habit of asking for deposit slips he never used. Some people know the history of a marriage through bank windows and small forms. That counts more than people think. She closed the office door and did not waste time. She turned the monitor slightly so I could see the account notes. There, in plain language, was an internal entry showing a signer update and authority change request processed 9 days before Daniel's death. My name had been removed as an authorized signer. Daniel remained. An additional access authority had been added on a limited basis, then upgraded within 48 hours. The added authority was Eric. I stared at the screen until the lines blurred. I asked Marcia who had filed it. She said the request packet showed Daniel's signature and a witness notary confirmation. She said she could not hand me every internal document immediately without process, but because the mortgage auto-pay risk involved me directly, and because of the irregularity flagged, she could review the archive with me in branch. Her voice was calm. That helped. Calm people save you when theatrical people are trying to bury you. Marcia printed recent signature card history and laid it on her desk. She pointed to the archive line. She pointed to the date. She pointed to the code indicating in-person identity verification had allegedly occurred off-site through a mobile notary acknowledgement attached to the packet. I looked at the date again. It was the Tuesday before Daniel died. On that Tuesday, Daniel had been in a hospital bed in our den under hospice supervision for most of the day. A nurse had been there. I had been there. Tara had brought soup that no one ate. Eric had come by for about 40 minutes in the evening. I knew where I had been. I knew what house I had been in. I knew no bank person and no notary had sat with me and watched me sign away my own authority. I had never even been asked. That was proof checkpoint number 2. The bank signature card archive showing my removal request was filed days before the funeral, while my husband was dying in the next room. I asked Marcia whether the bank believed I had signed anything. She chose her words carefully. I believe the file says you were present. I also believe you are telling me you were not. That was the first mercy. She did not rush to protect the form over the person. I asked for copies of everything I was entitled to receive. She said she would submit a formal records request and place an immediate internal review on the account because the auto-pay and long-term ownership pattern did not match the sudden signer change. She also advised me to pause any discussion with family until I had the archive. I appreciated that. People like to tell widows to stay calm. Very few tell them to stay quiet until the papers arrive. There is a difference. Before I left, Marcia asked one more question. Did you receive the survivor benefit notice yet? I said no. I had received plenty of condolence mail and 2 insurance forms, but nothing from Daniel's pension office besides a general death notification packet. She frowned and checked another screen. Then she printed an address line from a benefits correspondence log. The survivor benefit letter had been mailed 5 days earlier to an address I did not recognize at first. Then I did. It was an apartment complex across town where Eric and Tara had lived before they bought their townhouse. My hands went cold. That was proof checkpoint number 3, though it came dressed as a question. Survivor benefit correspondence had been sent to the wrong address. Not accidentally wrong, specifically wrong. Old family address wrong, familiar wrong, chosen wrong. I drove home with copies in a manila envelope on the passenger seat and did not call anyone. I still remember the exact feeling. Not shock by then. Structure, the kind that comes over you when you realize grief is being used as cover. At home, I pulled out a yellow legal pad and began a timeline. Daniel's hospice start date, visitors, open mail, questions about paperwork, kitchen table conversation, bank call, branch visit, misaddressed survivor letter. I wrote each line slowly. Dates matter when people start lying in gentle voices. Michael called that evening. I had not told him much because he lived in Arizona and had just flown back after the funeral, and I did not want to sound wild or suspicious. There is always a fear, especially for older women, that if we say too much too soon, someone will call it confusion. So I stuck to facts. I told him the bank said I had been removed from the mortgage account. He went silent a long time. Then he said, "Mom, don't talk to Eric alone anymore." That should have told me everything, too. The next day, I went to the county recorder's office website, and then, because I am old-fashioned, I drove in and asked for a certified current property record. I wanted to know whether anything had happened to the house title while I was driving Daniel to appointments and filling pillboxes and choosing hymns for a funeral. The clerk printed the current title chain and recent filing history. There had been no transfer, no deed recorded, no post-death change. The house title remained as it had been. Daniel and Lorraine Mercer, joint tenancy with rights that mattered, then survivorship passage on death. There was no new deed, no recorded transfer to Eric, no ownership cleanup, nothing. That was proof checkpoint number 4. County title copy confirming the property transfer never happened, no matter how casually my kitchen table experts had discussed where the house belonged. I sat in my car with that certified copy in my lap and cried for the first time in a week. Not because I was weak, because paper had told me I still existed where people had started speaking as if I did not. I wish I could say that once I had those first documents, I turned fierce and clear. That is not what happened. Grief and procedure do not move at the same pace. I still made coffee for people I no longer trusted. I still let Tara carry soup containers to my refrigerator. I still listened when Eric used words like simplify and streamline and burden. But inside, something had changed. I was no longer listening to the tone. I was listening for nouns, account, access, benefit, house, signature, keys. That was the moment I stopped arguing and started checking. 3 days later, Eric came by unannounced. He stood in the kitchen with his car keys in his hand and said the pension people would probably be slow and messy, and offered to help route any benefits into an account for the bills. I asked which account. He said the main account, of course. I asked whether he meant the account the bank showed I had been removed from. He did not answer immediately. He looked toward the den, then back at me, then said Daniel had wanted him to help. I said, "Help is not removal." He said, "You're taking this the wrong way. That line appears whenever a person has no clean explanation. I told him I had been at the bank. His face changed, but only slightly. Tara, who had entered behind him carrying a bakery box, set it down and said, too quickly, "That's good. At least they can explain the transition." Transition. Another cold word. I said there had been no transition I had agreed to. Eric said Daniel had signed what needed signing. I asked whether I had signed anything. He said, "Dad said you didn't need the stress." That was the first truly honest thing he said, because it revealed the heart of it. Not that I was incapable, that I was inconvenient. There is a difference. A widow who is grieving can be spoken over. A wife with full authority cannot. I wanted to scream then. I did not. I had spent my life making excuses for people I loved. I was done with excuses, but I was not done with timing, so I only said, "I'll handle my own accounts." Tara tried one more soft approach. She said, "Lorraine, nobody is trying to take anything from you." People say that when they are already holding the handle. After they left, I checked Daniel's desk more carefully. I had searched it lightly after the funeral for insurance information, but now I emptied drawers fully. Checkbook carbons, warranty cards, a watch battery in a paperclip dish, a church pledge envelope from years earlier, and in the back of the bottom drawer, wedged flat under a legal pad, a sealed envelope with my name in Daniel's handwriting. Not elegant handwriting, not movie handwriting. Daniel wrote like a man trying to get back to the football game, but I knew it was his. I sat down before I opened it. Inside was one page folded twice. Also inside was a smaller envelope marked "desk key." The note was dated 6 months earlier. It was not a will. It was not some grand confession. It was plain. That made it more useful. Daniel wrote that if anything happened to him before the title and account review was cleaned up, I was to remain in the house without interference, and no temporary living arrangement was to be imposed on me by anyone. He named me as the person to decide whether Eric could access the den safe, and only if I approved. He wrote one sentence that mattered more than anything else. Lorraine is the one who has managed the house money and should stay on every account tied to the mortgage and house expenses. I read that line 3 times. Then I opened the small envelope. It held a brass key I had never seen. Later, I found it fit a narrow interior lockbox panel in the back of the den closet, behind hanging coats and an old plaid garment bag Daniel never wore. Inside that panel were duplicates, a folder of old mortgage records, refinance papers, insurance riders, 2 beneficiary forms, an outdated pension election, and one newer beneficiary confirmation that did not match the pension office mailing log. The form on file in the box listed me correctly. The benefits letter had been sent elsewhere. That meant either the address had been changed administratively after the form, or a correspondence redirect had been entered through some other channel. Either way, it did not support the story that everyone had just been trying to keep things organized. That was proof checkpoint number 5, the sealed desk envelope naming who was allowed to stay in the house and reminding any decent person that Daniel himself understood I managed the house money. The next morning, I called the pension office. I stayed on hold long enough to wash 2 coffee cups and stare at the same plant on the windowsill. When I finally reached a woman who knew her job, I learned that the survivor benefit letter had indeed been issued, and the mailing address had been changed through a phone confirmation request made after Daniel entered hospice. The representative would not give me all the details on the first call, but she would confirm one thing: the change request had not come from me, and the account notes showed a family support contact had been added temporarily. I asked who. She said she could not confirm that without a fraud review. So I opened one. That was proof checkpoint number 6. Survivor Benefit Administration had been touched by someone else after Daniel became vulnerable, and the first letter, meant for me, had been mailed away from my house. At that point, the pattern was no longer a feeling, it was a sequence. Account access altered, authority shifted, mail redirected, benefits touched, house discussed as if already assigned. Still, no one had asked me directly for keys or a move-out date. That is how this kind of thing works in ordinary families. They do not begin with open theft. They begin with phrases: temporary, easier, cleaner, less stress, better plan, family support, reasonable next step. I wanted to believe I was imagining it. I was not. The central betrayal came on the Friday before the second week ended. Eric called and said he and Tara wanted to stop by to go over practical matters before the month turns. Those were his words. I said I was tired. He said this would only take a few minutes. They arrived with a folder. He did not sit right away. He stood at the end of my kitchen table and slid the folder toward me. Inside was a printed list of proposed next steps, not on lawyer letterhead, not official, just typed. That almost made it worse. It meant they had made a family packet for my removal. The first item said household finances should be centralized through the existing checking account under current access control for bill stability. The second said the house should be evaluated for sale or transitional occupancy adjustment. The third said I should consider moving temporarily to a smaller supervised arrangement until long-term decisions were finalized. I read that line twice. Smaller supervised arrangement in my own kitchen. Before my husband had been dead 3 full weeks, I looked up at them. Tara folded her hands and said, "Please don't hear this the wrong way." There it was again. Eric said, "Nobody is throwing you out. We just can't let things drift." I asked, "Who is we?" He said, "Family." I said, "I am family." He said, "You know what I mean." Yes. Again, I knew what he meant. Family meant blood when authority was useful. It meant me when casseroles needed arranging and hospice shifts needed covering. It meant them when house control was on the table. Then he said the coldest line of the whole thing. If the account is already set up right, it makes sense to keep using it that way. Already set up right. That was the central betrayal. Not shouting, not threats. Worse, administrative cruelty dressed as maintenance. The account had been altered behind my back while my husband was dying, and now they were presenting that alteration as the natural starting point for the rest of my life. House, bills, occupancy, supervision, all because a form had been pushed through before the funeral flowers wilted. I closed the folder. I said, "Take this with you." Tara began. "Lorraine," I said, "take it with you." Eric left the folder anyway, maybe by accident, maybe because he thought it would pressure me overnight. It helped me instead. It showed premeditation. It showed vocabulary. It showed that by then they were not brainstorming. They were implementing. After they left, I called Marcia at the bank and asked whether the archive request had come in. It had. She told me I could review the signer packet the next morning. I barely slept that night, not because I was afraid by then, because every sentence spoken over the previous 2 weeks was lining itself up in my head. I had done what many women of my generation were taught to do. I had kept the peace. Now, peace was expensive. At the bank the next day, Marcia met me with a stack of copied records and one sealed review note from compliance that she could summarize but not release in full yet. She had the signature card archive, the account maintenance form, and the attached notary acknowledgement. My name was typed on the removal line. There was a signature beside it. It was not mine, not even a good imitation. Whoever had tried to copy it had made the L too high and the final E too tight. My hand shook when I saw it, not because I doubted myself, but because of how ordinary the fraud looked once it was printed. Family betrayal never arrives with music. It arrives on standard paper. The attached notary block listed a local mobile notary, name, registration number, date, and time. Marcia pointed to the timestamp. It was 2:16 p.m. on that Tuesday. At 2:16 p.m. on that Tuesday, the hospice nurse had been in my den, checking Daniel's breathing and changing his medication comfort log. I knew because I had signed her visit sheet and written down a pharmacy question. I still had that sheet clipped to the hospice binder in my hall cabinet. I went home, pulled the hospice binder, and there it was. Nurse visit, 2:05 p.m. to 2:42 p.m. My signature on receipt of medication update. Daniel semi-responsive. No outside administrative visitors noted. That was proof checkpoint number 7. The notary timing collided directly with hospice records in my own house. Then I called the mobile notary. He did not answer the first time. He answered the second. I said my name, the date, and the document type. He grew very quiet. Then he said he would need to check his log. I said I would wait. He asked if there was a problem. I said yes. I was listed as present for a bank signer removal. I was never present. Another silence. Then he said he kept a bound notary log and would review the entry. He called back 40 minutes later. He said the log showed he had been booked to witness Daniel Mercer's signature at our address. Only Daniel, not me. His entry listed 1 signer present, 1 ID reviewed, 1 bedside signature due to illness. There was no line for Lorraine Mercer, no ID review for me, no signature from me in the logbook. He said his acknowledgement had apparently been attached later to a broader signer change packet than the one he had witnessed. I sat down at my kitchen table when he said that. There it was. That was proof checkpoint number 8. The notary log proved I was never present for the change, and the notarial act had been stretched past what was actually witnessed. I asked whether he would put that in writing. He said yes. Some people ask why I did not call the police at that point. I understand that question. But first, there are layers. Bank review, fraud affidavit, benefit dispute, property preservation. You do not swing at every target when the whole room is leaning. You stabilize what keeps a roof over your head. I had learned that from years of making one paycheck do the work of two. Over the next 3 days, I worked like a clerk in my own case. I printed the mortgage statements. I copied Daniel's note from the sealed envelope. I obtained the certified county title copy. I flagged the misaddressed survivor benefit letter. I added the hospice timing sheet. I requested the notary's written statement and later picked it up from his office. I wrote a timeline of every conversation involving accounts, title, supervision, access, or temporary arrangements. I photographed the packet Eric left on my table. I saved call logs. I stopped arguing and started checking. That line became my routine. Marcia helped me submit a formal fraud affidavit regarding the signer removal. Because the mortgage auto-pay history tied so clearly to the old account pattern, and because the signature discrepancy was obvious even to an untrained eye, the bank escalated fast. She also froze any new non-essential changes pending investigation. Russell called again, this time with more respect in his tone. Funny how paper changes voices. The pension office opened its own review. They confirmed later that the family support contact added during Daniel's hospice period had been Eric, and the correspondence address had been updated through a call in which the caller stated he was assisting with post-death processing. He had not been listed as beneficiary. He had not been listed as surviving spouse. He had simply inserted himself into the route. I did not confront him yet. The reveal began in the bank office, just as it should have. Marcia asked whether I wanted to meet with Eric present once the bank finalized its preliminary findings. I said yes, not because I needed drama, because I wanted one controlled room where calm would outrun his wording. She arranged it. Eric came. Tara came too, though she said little once she saw the stack on the desk. Marcia began with policy, not emotion. She stated the account had been under long-term joint signing structure tied to mortgage payment continuity. She stated a late-stage signer removal had been processed on the basis of a packet that, upon review, contained irregularities. She placed the signature card archive on the desk. She placed enlarged copies of the relevant signatures beside it. Then she placed the notary clarification letter beside those. No speeches, just paper. Eric said Daniel had wanted him to help. Marcia said the issue was not Daniel's desire for help. The issue was that the removal of an existing signer required valid authorization from that signer or equivalent lawful authority, and the bank had no verified evidence that I had ever authorized my own removal. She then read one line from the notary clarification. Only Daniel Mercer's bedside signature had been witnessed. No acknowledgement was made as to Lorraine Mercer's presence or signature on the signer removal portion of the packet. Eric looked at the papers but did not touch them. Tara said there must have been confusion because Daniel was very sick. Marcia said, illness does not create authority. That was one of the only strong lines spoken that whole week, and it did not come from me. Then she slid over the internal review summary. The account signer removal was being reversed. My access was restored in full pending final fraud resolution. Eric's added authority was suspended. Any further changes would require in-person verified consent from me alone, or court-recognized estate documentation that did not displace surviving account rights already established. The old mortgage draft pattern would be preserved through a protected bridge arrangement while the review completed. That was correction number 1. Then I laid my own papers on the desk. The mortgage statements, the county title copy, Daniel's note from the envelope, the survivor benefit mailing log printout, the hospice visit sheet. I did not make a speech. I said, the house title was never transferred. I set down the certified copy. I said the mortgage was paid from that account for years with my income in it. I set down the statements. I said, Daniel wrote that I was to stay in the house without interference and remain on every account tied to it. I set down the note. I said, the notary says I was never there. I set down the letter, I said, and the first survivor letter was mailed away from my address. I set down the printout. That was the reveal. One proof after another. Calm correction. Documents speaking louder than grief. Eric tried one more route. He said, nobody was trying to hurt you. We were trying to keep things from getting chaotic. I said, chaos is when people move a widow off her own account before the burial week ends. He had no answer to that. The meeting ended without raised voices. That mattered to me. I did not need volume. I needed record. But there was still the matter of my kitchen table, my house, and the packet that used the phrase transitional occupancy adjustment, as if I were a chair being moved to storage. That part happened 3 nights later at my house. I invited Eric and Tara over after dinner. Michael joined by video call on a tablet propped near the sugar bowl because he wanted to hear every word. I spread the papers across the table before they arrived, not to impress them, but to avoid any drifting language. If facts are not visible, people start rearranging them. When they sat down, I handed Eric the county title copy first. He looked at it and said nothing. Then I handed him a photocopy of Daniel's note. Tara read over his shoulder. Her face changed before his did. That told me something, too. Whatever planning had happened, she had not known everything Daniel had written, or she had assumed I would never find it. Then I handed them the notary statement. Then the bank correction notice. Then the pension review acknowledgement. I kept my voice even. I said the house was not under review by them. I said the account would not be centralized under their control. I said no temporary move, supervised arrangement, downsizing plan, or occupancy adjustment would be discussed again unless I raised it. I said any future communication about benefits, title, or accounts would be in writing. I said if mail intended for me was routed elsewhere again, I would treat it as interference, not help. I said house keys in their possession, if any copies existed, were to be surrendered. Tara said quietly that they did not have a key. I believed she believed that. So I looked at Eric. He waited too long before answering. Then he said he had an old emergency copy from years back. I held out my hand. He did not move. Michael's voice came through the tablet speaker and said, "Give her the key." It was not dramatic. It was practical. Sometimes that is enough. Eric took a key from his ring and set it on the table. I placed it beside the sugar bowl and kept going. I said I had already updated the alarm code and would be changing the side door lock cylinder the next morning. I said the bank had restored my authority. I said the title remained where it legally belonged. I said Daniel's own note settled the rest of the moral question, whether anyone liked it or not. Then I said something I had been slow to learn. Concern is not authority. Nobody spoke after that for several seconds. Then Tara began to cry. Not heavily, not theatrically, quietly. She said they had only been trying to make sure I would not be alone with too much to handle. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But by then, I had seen the wording in the packet. I had seen the mailed benefits diverted. I had seen my forged removal signature. Help does not need forgery. Help does not reroute mail. Help does not draft occupancy adjustment language for a widow in week 2. Eric finally said Daniel had asked him to step in because he was worried about me. I told him stepping in was not the same as stepping over. Again, he had no answer. That kitchen table meeting was not loud. It was final. The aftermath was plain. It needed to be. I changed every exterior lock that week, not because I wanted to be symbolic, but because key control matters when people begin using words like transition. I updated the bank with fresh security instructions and verbal password flags. I moved all survivor benefit correspondence to certified delivery for 60 days. I filed a forwarding block and address verification request at the post office. I placed a fraud watch note with the pension office and later with one insurance carrier that had received a call from Eric asking procedural questions. I met with an attorney and updated my own estate documents. Michael was named for limited emergency roles only, and even then with strict written boundaries, because I had learned that love and access are not the same thing. I also did one thing some people found harsh. I sent Eric a short letter, not emotional, not cruel, just clear. Future visits by arrangement only, no handling of mail, no requests for account or title documents, no representation of himself as assisting my financial affairs. Communication about Daniel's keepsakes could occur later, in writing. That was all. For several months, contact was thin. Holiday invitations came through Tara in careful language. I declined the first one, not out of revenge, because trust had become expensive, and I was no longer handing it out because the calendar said family. The bank completed its review. The signer removal was formally reversed as unauthorized. The file was marked with an internal irregularity note. Because Daniel had been terminally ill, and because the packet had mixed a legitimate witnessed bedside signature with an unauthorized broader signer change, the bank did not present it to me as some simple mistake. They understood what had happened, even if nobody used the ugliest words out loud. That mattered. Institutions often fail older women by smoothing over facts. This time, one did not. The pension office corrected the correspondence route and paid survivor benefits properly to me. They would not tell me every detail of the internal note, but one representative said enough. The prior address change request should never have been accepted without fuller verification from the surviving spouse. I agreed. I kept the house. Not because I am sentimental beyond reason, because it was mine to decide. That is a different thing. I repaired the porch rail that spring. I cleaned Daniel's desk in stages. I left the sealed envelope note in my attorney's file and kept a copy in the hall cabinet. I put the brass key from the closet panel on a labeled ring. I labeled more things after that: drawer contents, utility shutoff instructions, insurance contact sheet, title folder, account summary. Some people would call that overcautious. I call it the price of learning late. I still remember small humiliations more clearly than large ones. The way Tara said transition while setting a bakery box on my counter. The way Eric said family and left me out of it while sitting in my own kitchen. The way the banker first asked his question as if perhaps I had decided to remove myself from 23 years of mortgage responsibility. Humiliation has a procedural sound when it comes through ordinary voices. That is why it can be so dangerous. It does not announce itself. For a long time, I blamed Daniel too, quietly. Not because I thought he had ordered all of it, but because he had allowed too much closeness between worry and authority in his final months. Then I reread his note. Not the whole note, just the line about me staying on every account tied to the house. I understood then that he had seen enough to leave me a trail, but not enough strength to stop every hand reaching in. Illness weakens more than the body. It weakens a household's defenses. That is another truth people do not say plainly enough. I tell this story because many women my age still think betrayal has to look dramatic to count. It does not. Sometimes it is a changed address. Sometimes it is a signature added where yours was supposed to be. Sometimes it is a son standing in your kitchen saying an account is already set up. Right because he thinks timing can beat truth. It cannot. Not forever. Paperwork tells the truth faster than grief does. That is the plain lesson I learned. If your name is missing, pay attention. If someone says they are only trying to help, check what they already touched. If practical language arrives before the casseroles are gone, pay attention. If someone wants your signature too quickly or says you do not need the stress, pay attention. Concern can mask control. Family can use soft voices while reaching for hard things. I learned that late, but not too late. I live more quietly now. The house is calmer under stricter access. Bills are paid from accounts no one else touches. The locks are mine. The mail comes to my box. The kitchen table is only for meals and my own papers. That is enough. At my age, enough is not a small thing. Tell me honestly, what would you have done in my place? Would you have forgiven them? Let me know in the comments what city you're listening from. And if stories like this matter to you, please like the video and subscribe.